Hearty shalom to you, Jeffrey Seif here, for one last treatment of the book of Acts, the Acts of the Holy Spirit, principally the Acts of the Spirit working through Paul, referred to as the Acts of the Apostles, but it doesn't really give voice to all of them, much as it chronicles the particulars of the journey of one of them, Paul, who began on a journey to Damascus and had an experience with the Lord, knocked off his horse. He's going to wind up meandering about in Arabia for 3 years. He eventually is going to go back to Tarsus for a decade, and then finally he'll be beckoned to come to Antioch, Syria, which will be a launching pad for him in due time to then start to go out into the Greco-Roman world. And that was his calling, appropriately referred to as the apostle to the Gentiles. I think that's misconstrued in a variety of ways. It's not that the man ignored the Jewish people. He, as we follow in his footsteps, always visited synagogues and there met individuals of Jewish and non-Jewish extract and ministered, and a core followed him, constituted by Jews and non-Jews alike. In due time, however, more and more women and men of non-Jewish extract started populating the movement, and thus you had churches that forgot their Jewish origins, and in time and circumstance all that evaporated, and a church that was once Jewish became un-Jewish and sadly eventually anti-Jewish. And then you have people like myself, my ministry and the Tree of Life and others are minded to want to help people to rediscover the Jewish roots. Well, in Acts chapter 28, we have Paul interred in Rome in prison. Jewish leaders come, they conversate. It's reasonably respectful, but it ends on something of a sour note, at least thus construed, because Luke uses the moment to pivot and talk about Paul's principal outreach to non-Jews. It's rather interesting when he's speaking here. Paul is just speaking exclusively to Jews that are coming and visiting him in the cell. We're told in verse 25 that, well, just beforehand, if you look at the verses, Jewish leaders come, and in verse 25 they disagree among themselves, and some then begin leaving, subsequent to Paul's making a statement that's very draconian, it's very forceful. He quotes a passage out of Isaiah saying, listen, people's hearts are hardened and dulled, and the net result is that they could turn away from that, but they just don't. And he applies that to then say in verse 28, therefore, and whenever you see the word therefore, you want to see what came before there. Therefore, let it be known to you that this salvation of God has been sent to the Gentiles, and they will listen. That is, after underscoring that not all of the Jewish leaders listened. This, for rhetorical purposes, becomes a pivot to say, well, we'll go to the Gentiles and they'll listen. Of course, not all Gentiles listen either. In case people haven't noticed, you can go into a city, well, I don't care if it has 10,000 or 100,000 or a million. You know, if the churches are open and full to the brim, there's maybe room for 100,000, 900,000 out of a million, or 90,000 out of 100,000. They're sleeping in on a Sunday morning. They're not really into it. Truth of the matter is that people, at least in America, where I've done most of my living, to tell you the truth, people know about Jesus Christ and the churches are open, but the truth of the matter is some people reject outright, many are indifferent. Sometimes the best you can get is a kind of ambivalence. Well, yeah, I kind of believe, or I kind of don't, but they're not really into it. So the problem of the human heart not being inclined toward the cross, it's not a Jewish problem uniquely. For rhetorical purposes here, Paul's biographer, Luke, who's writing his story, and if you look at Paul's story, the ending in Acts is perfectly consistent with what's interwoven into the tapestry of the story. That is, you see that Rabbi Paul frequents cities. He ministers in synagogues. He gathers a following of Jews. There is a rejection. Those Jews who accept him then, with some of the Gentile friendlies, become the nucleus of a new entity. And this is repeated time and time again. I mention that because it's not just that Luke here is pivoting off of a bad experience with Paul and the Jewish leaders when he was interred in Rome, because it's not a horribly bad experience. Luke will go out of his way to say that people come and they say, and they're friendly, they're open-minded, but as it is, not all receive. And in the wake of the Jewish leaders, who are the gatekeepers of the community, some respond, some don't. When there's no more work there, you pivot, you go somewhere else. And I've done that too in my own ministerial career, where you minister somewhere, and Jesus said, when you go, if they invite you into their home, stay. But if they take back their peace, then shake the dust off your feet and move on. That is to say, there's kind of like a radical departure. You have to go. The way I put it is, I'll go where I'm invited and I stay where I'm appreciated. I don't want to just spend all my energies, going around the same mountain and knocking down doors when they're barred shut. I'd rather pivot and move. And that doesn't mean that I'm casting any final judgments on people that don't respond to me. I've had occasion in life when people have been negative to me, and rather than just, go out in a blaze of glory, I just step back, pivot, and move, and then things change and people catch up with you down the road, and you reconnect. I've seen that happen in more than one occasion in 64 years of living. My pivoting away and going another direction isn't indicative of any final judgments, actually, on the people to whom I was unable to make progress with. In any case, I think that Rabbi Paul here is misunderstood. He's not pivoting entirely away from the Jewish people. It's just his project was, you go to a place, you speak to the Jewish people first, and when all the possibilities and all that are exhausted, well, there's a whole world beyond Jews, like yous. God's honest truth, I like to put it in my own ministry. I want to help Jewish people come to know Jesus. I want to help Jesus people come to know Jews. I'm all about loving Jewish people and loving non-Jewish people alike, and I'm a minister of the gospel, among other things, and I'll talk to anybody that'll listen to me. A lot of people slam the door, Jews and Gentiles alike, but I'll take any friend I can get. All that said, thanks for being a friend and going on the journey. Let's do this again, but it will not be in the book called Acts of the Apostles. I spoke to the big boss, Danya Greenberg, and she said, Jeff, let's pivot and go to Hebrews. So off we go to the book of Hebrews. If you want to go on the journey, I'll see you next week. Until then, shalom and God bless. Ciao.